Hello and welcome to another episode of LGOtv Big Talk. And why Big Talk? Because I hate small talk. My guest today is one of my very dear friends, Mike Ganino. And Mike is a storytelling and communications expert. He helps authors, experts, coaches, entrepreneurs create signature talks that set them up with instant online authority and instant on stage authority. He works with clients who have been academics, who have been thought leaders, who have they're people that you know, they're bold-faced names. He is not just a great storyteller. He's somebody who helps you tell your own story. And so we're going to talk today about how he became a storyteller, how he figured out his own story, and how he helps people like me tell our stories. He is the former executive producer of TEDx Cambridge, and there and in his own private practice has helped speakers to just reach millions of people, to get their stories across, their points across, their messages across, so that they can help change the world. He's also the host of the Mic Drop Moment podcast, which I was the very first guest. Thank you very much. Pretty awesome. That was scary because I had to make sure, I was doing all right. And he is the author of Company Culture for Dummies, which I got to read a very early copy of. And through that book and the speaking that he does on culture, he's been named one of the top 30 culture speakers by Global Gurus. So you're in for a treat today because he is going to talk to us about how do we make our own stories come off the page, come off the stage, come off the screen, and really impact other people. And we're going to get to hear it through his own story. So Mike, welcome.
Thanks so much. I love it. I also just realized, embarrassingly and blushingly, if my face turned pink in the middle of that you're wearing the shirt that I gave you. I noticed that. Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Wow.
So for people who are listening to this later, I want to explain that I'm wearing a shirt that has a cartoon rendition of Mike. It is incredible. He's got his hair that's like 5 feet off of his 5 feet off of his forehead, and he's got his your vest on, and the argyle vest and your glasses, and it says "Bring me Mike Ganino." And for those of you who are watching this, you can see it right here. But Mike, I actually wanted to start by having you tell us the story of Bring Me Mike Ganino because it's fantastic.
I don't even remember exactly.
Oh, Zingerman's.
Oh, yes. I was doing a so there's a company called Zingerman's in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and for the longest time I've been friends of them. Back when I became a dean of students at a restaurant company back when I was like 26, and I was in charge of putting together all of these like corporate trainings and things like that for our managers and people. And so I went around. They gave me like I think it's because I worked there so long and I was going to leave, and I was like a poster child for all of our retail stores, so they didn't want me to leave, so they made up a job because nobody literally cared what I did. Like they were like, here's money and a budget, and I just traveled around and took classes everywhere to figure out like how could we teach better classes. And one of them was at Zingerman's, and I fell in love with them 15 years ago. And a couple of years ago I had the opportunity to go in and speak for them. They hired me to come in and teach some of their clients in a speaker series. I'm actually doing it again in 2020. I did it in 2019. So I've been back a few times. And so I don't remember exactly how I ended up making a shirt for you, though. Like, what was it that I was like, you need this shirt? Because it's not like a shirt that I had. I made it for you.
No, I remember that I remember you were texting me and you said that that you always thought this company was absolutely incredible, and they called you one day and they asked you to come in and work for them, and you said, well, how do you know about me? And they said, well, our CEO was watching some stuff about company culture and how do we do this, and he saw something about you and he said, bring me Mike Ganino.
Yeah. And so and my question always is when someone hires me, like, who else have you talked to? Part of that was just like research wise, I was just curious, like, who else are you considering? What else are you looking at? And in this case, it was nobody. And it was actually a really good lesson for me of like, how do you become, because one of the challenges I think so many people that are in that kind of speaker world or trainer world who are working with corporate is they go through human resources. Well, to human resources, people like us are a commodity. It's like, I've got a budget and I needed someone to come and do a training. So I need to go find someone. How can I get the best deal? And what I learned in that was that if I could figure out how to go like direct, how to get onto like the CEO's agenda, how to get into the VP of sales. I do a lot of like storytelling for sales workshops now. So how can I get onto that person's radar? And then I don't have to work. They sign the checks. And that lesson for me was from that when I said, who else have you talked to? And they said, well, nobody, because they said, bring me Mike Ganino. That's who we want, because they heard you on a show or something. They read an article. And I thought, that's what you're supposed to be doing. Because when somebody wants to have Rachel Ray on their show, they don't also look at Martha Stewart. They just call Rachel Ray. And so how do we become that? That became like my mission as a speaker very early in my career, because I thought that's our goal, is to just become a category of one.
Absolutely. And so we were texting about this and I was like, oh my God, bring me my Ganino. I need that on a t-shirt. And then a month later, you and I are in Philadelphia. Go Philadelphia.
Yes,
And
Philly.
go Philly. And we at a we had a bunch of our speaker friends all got together to do like a little mastermind retreat weekend. And you walk in and you hand me a shirt that says bring me Mike and I immediately go to the bathroom and I change out of the shirt and I'm wearing like these awesome Burberry check pants, these great vintage pants, and a Dolce and Gabbana blazer. And I don't remember what the shirt was, but I took the shirt and I balled it up and I threw it in my bag and I put the Bring Me Mike and t-shirt on. I was like, this has made the outfit. This is incredible. And I love this t-shirt.
It was like the greatest day ever too, because she literally wore it all day long. We were in this like event all day, and then in
It's
the
like grown
evening
up
there was like,
professionals, right?
yeah, yeah, it was. I was like, this is the greatest advertisement ever. Somebody who is iconic as LGO is wearing my face on her shirt. This is a win.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I've got your face on my shirt. It's amazing. I love it. And you and I had actually, I think, had we met only one time before that? I don't know that we'd met more.
I think we only met the one time when you were in a class I was teaching. You had gone to a conference, and I was teaching at that conference, and you were in an improv for public speaker class, I think. And I think that's the only time we'd really interacted. We'd never, and then online, just texting and emailing and stuff.
And it was exactly a year earlier because it was the same group, right? It was the
Yeah.
same group. And so we'd interacted in that class. And uh that class was the worst moment of my life. Like the worst moment of my professional life. It was horrible. You made me do improv and I thought I was gonna die.
I
It's
love
just
this.
improv is
This
it's the
is always
worst
a
thing
thing that
ever.
happens too. It's so funny when I was working with a ton of speakers over the course of a few years. People would come in and they would have to do all these really hard things. They'd have to write, and they'd have to do movement classes and voice classes, and they'd have to get in front of their peers and like make up something and give their speech and like their opus to the world. And the thing that they were most scared of was like my spiky haired little face uh, that was going to make them like become a radio or something in front of people. And it's such an interesting thing. And speaking of the idea of wonder hell, it's walking into a new world and saying, I'm going to figure out what to do in this world and what to make from it. And I think that's really scary for people, of like, can I navigate this?
I just remember walking in and I saw you in your spiky haired little face and I was like, I hate that guy. I don't like it wasn't I didn't opt to go to the improv class. Like the entire conference was separated and we got an agenda and we were assigned classes. Like I had to go. So I was like, okay, fine. It's in a big room. There's like 50 of us in here. I'll just hide in the back. I'm really good at hiding in the back. That's like my MO. And then you stood in the middle of the room and you made us all form a giant circle around you. So there was no back. I couldn't hide. It was like, what am I going to do? And then you assigned us like these people clucked like chickens and those people mooed like cows and these people had to have a conversation like you were like in the in on like you were barn animals and I was like this is my living hell. Like this is I like I sit on the aisle seat of every airline not because I think I'm going to survive the fiery ball of death of a crash, but because I like the illusion of control. Like I just it was my idea of hell. And I will tell you that taking that improv class from you fundamentally changed who I am on stage and my comfort and my courage and my confidence to be able to go out there and say, regardless of what happens, I know I got this because I fundamentally understand what comes next, because what comes next is determined by me and I actually am in control of that. So it ended up being exactly the opposite of what I thought when I walked in the room.
It's so interesting too when I've talked to people about like my journey with improv. Uh, I was an actor in my early 20s in Chicago. I started doing improv, and I realized I liked it because I didn't have to play any role that someone else wrote for me. Like,
Mm,
I get to write what I want to do. And I don't think I had this clarity at 20 that I do now. So I'm looking back on it and making myself sound a lot smarter than I probably was at 20. But like, as a gay man, I got to decide what a gay person on stage looked like, not a writer who was not gay, who was creating stereotypes of me. I got to write that myself because I was doing it in the moment. And so for me, it was exactly the same thing that you're saying, where I realized that I actually was in control. I wasn't in control of what the other person on stage would do, but I was certainly much more able to be in control of what I was doing. And that was really freeing for me in a way. That's the opposite, I think, of what people feel when they think of improv. They think it's scary, it's making it up in the moment. How will I know what to do? And it's like, what a great freeing thing when you realize you'll know what to do.
It's been amazing to me, and there have been moments where I'm on stage now where I literally on stage things are going sideways. The tech's not working. There's somebody in they introduced me totally wrong. I have they want me to fill an hour when I was supposed to have 45 minutes, or they want me to do a half hour when I was supposed to have 45 minutes, and I have to change things on the fly. And literally on stage, time slows down now, and I think about you, and I think it's just yes, and we can do this. What's next? What's the main thing I want to get across? And what's the feel I want people to have? And then where do I go from there? And it's incredible because I used to stand on stage and I would be thinking about my lines that I'd memorized, which other people helped me write. And then I would have the tape in the back of my head, like, well, why is that guy looking at his phone? And where's that woman going? And am I boring people? Or, it says only 10 minutes left. And oh, shoot, am I at the right point? And now it's a completely different tape that's in the back of my head because of this crazy thing called improv. But I think it comes back to storytelling, right? Like, what's the story I want to leave people with at the end of the day? Your story started off, here's my genius segue here. Your story started off very different from where you ended up today, right? You are thriving. You've got this incredibly successful business, incredible marriage, brand new baby, but you started off somewhere where that was not the expectation of where you were going to end up. Bring us back to baby Mike. Bring us back to young Mike when you were
Baby
growing
Mike.
up.
I mean, my mom was a teen. My mom and dad were both teen parents. Um, there's all the statistics that go along with that say, hey, this is usually how that ends up. We had that typical journey where we struggled with money. My parents got divorced, all of those things that are not unique to me,
Hmm.
that a lot of people have been through as well. And I lived in the trailer, had the food stamps, recognizing, there's this really interesting thing that I wrote about not that long ago when, because my mom is just like the most incredibly loving person. And she is so responsible for how I look at the world and how I look at other people. And the possibility that I see in everything is so based on her. And I was writing about how there was never a second, I think they gave her the option when she was 15 of like, you want to do this or you don't want to do this, and having me, or keeping me. And she was like, no, this is absolutely, this person is this. I love this person. This person's going to change my life, change the world. I'm down with this person. He's like my best friend. And those stories I remember hearing always. And yet at the same time, as much as she felt that way about me, she felt very shameful of herself
Mm.
because of what she had done, because of that, but never about me. And so it was this very interesting thing to realize. I think at a young age, I realized that there's duality in everything, that something that could be like the greatest, again, and my mom says this even today, of like, she was like, this person's gonna change the world. This person gets stuff and is just makes everything better. She would say those things. And yet she felt that she was, and it's like, if you feel like you're a horrible person, then how would you have had me? I've said this to her so many times. How did you create me if that's true? It must not be true. And so I think from an early age, I realized there were two sides to everything, that hope needs fear, that shame needs love and joy. I realized that those things both existed. And I think that was a gift, because I realized that if I was, a kid growing up in rural Arizona, going to high school and graduating with 90 people, I told everyone recently on Facebook, like, hey, it's going to take Arizona a little while to count those votes. I graduated from an Arizona high school, so don't worry, everybody. That there's another side to that coin too. That if this could exist, that I was a closeted gay kid in this rural town in the middle of nowhere in the desert, there's another side to that coin somewhere too. And if I keep looking and if I keep finding, I can get there. And I think that that's been like the biggest lesson through all of the things has been, there's another side to this somewhere. If there's fear, then there must be hope, because if there's no hope, then you don't have fear. Like if you don't hope for something different, you don't have fear. Like, whatever, I don't care. They need each other. And so if you're in this place where, how I felt lots of times, of like, I don't know if this is ever going to get better. This is horrible. I feel horrible. I don't know what to do. Something about the way that I grew up helped me see that, like, there is going to be another side to this somewhere, or else we would just be hopeless.
So there you are, you're growing up, you're in your home, you're in your trailer, you're wherever you are, hiding out in your closet, and you are dreaming about what you could be, like what the other side, what did you dream that might be?
Ally McBeal. I wanted to be Ally McBeal. That was my dream. No, I always dreamed of communicating. Really, honestly, like I don't know that I knew all the options for that, honestly, but I liked the lawyer shows, because I saw them like convincing people of things and influencing people with their words. And I saw the power in being able to say, if you can put your ideas and your narrative in the right order, you can help to change people's minds. You can help people see things they didn't see before. I saw the same thing in entertainers and people that were on stage or singing, acting, communicating in that way. I don't know that I think I was probably in my 30s before I realized you could be a public speaker. I didn't really realize that was a thing that people could do. But I always knew that somehow communicating was it for me. And I remember when I was in high school having this moment where I was running for student. So this is relevant in 2020. I was running for student body class president, right? And against someone who was really popular. I was the smart one. I was the editor of the high school newspaper. Getting threatened to, like, I went before the school board because I wrote an op-ed about how our Abstinence Now conference speaker that came in and spoke was really irresponsible for a graduating class that 20% had a baby or was pregnant at our graduation, that was an irresponsible choice to not represent both sides. So I had to go before the school board because they this is Arizona, football town, Christian principal, all of those things. And they just were like, who is this guy? So I was that person. I was in the honor roll. I was in the Spanish club. I was the president of National Honor Society. And I thought, for sure, I'm going to be able to win, because what is this person? She's going to do nothing to help all these people. Of course, I didn't win. She won. And I realized that at that moment, that the best idea is not always the one that wins. That the best book is not the one that becomes the bestseller, that the best plans inside of an organization are not the ones that get made, that the best movies don't get made. It's the best communicated ones that win. It's the person with the best story or narrative that wins. And that was something that I remember really specifically at 17 learning, that I had to figure out how to keep doing that. And so communicating in some way was what I wanted to do. I just didn't know what was possible. So when I first went to college, I went for broadcast journalism, because I thought, well, that's communicating and you're on TV and they give you a platform to talk to people. So I guess I'll go do Good Morning Albuquerque or something. So that's what I originally thought it would be.
So I love that. I love that even back then the school board was like this op-ed, bring me Mike Ganino.
Yeah, literally. And it
Get
was
him here.
and what a funny thing too. It's like the person who's like, one of the smarter people in school who like never had detention, never was in trouble for anything. I'm going to the school board to get like punished, to get kicked out because I wrote about abstinence not being that we shouldn't only teach that.
Yeah, well, I joke around that in my high school, I grew up in Miami, the cheerleading uniforms came in 4 sizes, small, medium, large, and maternity. So I think you and I probably went to the same school.
Yep. Yep.
For sure. Okay, so along the way, you also you're singing, right? You're singing and you're thinking maybe I'll make my way. You tried out for American Idol, didn't you?
I did twice. And in
Twice.
every other pop star, making of the band, boy bands, I tried out for all of them. But yeah, I tried out for season 1 of American Idol.
Wow. Wow. And how far did you make it?
I made it to the judges. I didn't know I knew who Paula Abdul was, but I didn't know who Simon was or Randy was because it was season 1. And if you remember, if you go back and you watch the videos from season 1, it looks like it was shot in like a mall and a Holiday Inn. Like it was not the Dolby Kodak Theater in Hollywood or any of that. If you go back and watch season 1, like watch like the run up to Kelly Clarkson winning, it was like they gave her no budget for hair, makeup, and clothes. They were all living in like a house together. They had to do ads for the Ford Focus, and the stage was tiny. It looks like they're in a conference room. You and I have spoke on bigger stages than they gave them. And so we didn't know what it was really. It was like, what is this going to be? And so then watching it, I lived in DC at the time. I was 22 and I lived in DC, and I would go to, there's a restaurant called DuPont Italian Kitchen, Dick. The shirt said eat at Dick's. And so it was DuPont Italian Kitchen. And I would go there. Upstairs, they had a bar and they would have karaoke on like Tuesday or Wednesday night. And I would go and I would sing why I thought this was a good idea. I would go and I would sing whatever song Kelly Clarkson sang that week on American Idol to these people. And it was like a bar that wasn't really a bar. It was like a room in someone's house, it looked like. So just like wandering around couches singing Natural Woman or whatever she sang that week.
It was still bigger than the stage that they were on in season
still
1.
Bigger than her stage, yeah. And then I auditioned for season 2 of the show, and that was when Clay Aiken and Ruben Studdard were the finalists. And there was such a huge transition because in season 1 it was like you sang for some producers and then you went into the judges. In season 2, I like slept on the street in Atlanta for 48 hours. It was like had blown up. It was much different. I ended up winning Carnival Idol, by the way. I won a Carnival cruise for 2 by singing every night on a cruise. I was on a cruise. Every night you would sing in the karaoke bar, and the winners from each of the nights would then perform on the big stage in the cruise ship, still bigger than season 1 of American Idol. We would sing on the big stage with a live band. And so we did that. And I won a cruise for, a free cruise for 2 by being named the Carnival Idol of that specific week in the Western Caribbean.
I always knew you were a carny.
Totally.
So most people will list public speaking above death as one of their biggest fears. And your story is like, I was this closeted gay kid with a mom who felt shame about herself, and yet you're out there out front in front of the school board and the newspaper editor, and you're singing and you're wanting to be on broadcast journalism, you want to be in front of the show. Were you scared? Were you ever scared of this, like putting yourself out there and people really seeing you?
I think there was part of it. I would say that there was part of it that was me controlling what other people could see. That I thought that if I could manage I learned about impression management early. I think most gay people do. You learn about impression management early. And I guess I thought that if I could control how other people saw me, then they wouldn't see anything I didn't want them to see. It was my version of drag in a way.
Yes.
And so it wasn't
persona. You wrote the
yeah.
as that person out publicly.
Yeah. And I think also partially led, I mean, again, great role models I had in my mother and my grandmother who told me, like, they told me, and I believed them, like, you could be whatever you want to be. They said that, and I was like, I actually think I can. Like, I believed them. And they would encourage me to say the things I wanted to say. When I was in 7th grade, I was getting picked on, like, horribly bullied. And I just didn't, I just couldn't handle school anymore. And my mom was like, what do you want to do? Let's go and let's make it happen. What do you think is going to help you? And she always trusted my instinct. And I think it taught me a lot about trusting my own instinct. So, like, again, as much as she might beat herself up over not being mother of the year and those things, I think I'm better off for the way that she did raise me to speak up and to trust my instincts than a lot of other people who had all the things, and didn't have to worry about food or any of those things. And so I think in my mid-20s, I finally, I came out when I was 18 or 19. And in my mid-20s, I made a decision as I became a leader, as I moved into leadership roles in organizations, as I was more visible, and as other people in organizations would look at me and say, oh, I want that guy's job. I want to do what he does. I realized that, as small and stupid as it is to be like, yeah, for this 100-unit restaurant chain, I had a platform. There were a bunch of people who saw me succeeding and being liked and doing well and thriving. And I thought, I never can be closeted again, because I know that somewhere there is someone who is me at 17 working in one of these restaurants, someone who is maybe older than me, who's hidden themselves. And I refuse to not make sure there are examples, because that was something I missed. And so I made that decision of, like, being publicly out. I've done that as a speaker as well. As I became, I never have filtered my Instagram, my social media, never, because I realized the power that visibility has.
It comes though with, it comes with thorns though also, right? I mean, clearly there have to be clients who decided not to hire you because of that. Some of whom may have told you that, and probably a lot of whom have not. I mean, my story being dragged all over Twitter by Ann Coulter, who told me I was an anti-Christian white male hater. And that was a pretty dark and scary, tough time. And I called a mutual friend of ours, Dory Clark, and I was like, what am I going to do? Did I just ruin my entire speaking career? Which I didn't know speaking was a thing till I was like 46. So you're like way ahead of me on that. And she was like, look, she's like, Laura, for the people who hate you for this, they already did, because they've looked at your bio. They know you worked in the Clinton White House. They know what you stand for. They know who you are. And the people who love you for it love you even more now. And congratulations, you just became the most interesting person at every cocktail party. But, I still had to make a decision in that moment. Do I lean in to just being who I am, an out proud progressive who's going to, go to the mat about human rights? Or do I go back in and I just do like motherhood and apple pie stuff? I don't know that
Yeah.
you could stick that back in with a sledgehammer, but here I am.
Yeah, there's I mean, and honestly, I will say that during this 2020 election cycle, there's legitimate fears.
Yes.
I have an office, like a separate studio than my house, that's not at my house. And I immediately started changing all my addresses, because I have a tiny little human who I am responsible for now, in that house. And I'm very unwilling to not say what I want to say. And I also am trained in political satire at Second City. So, I wrote the other day, I don't know what I'm going to do after this election cycle, because I'm 100% funnier when there's political comedy. I'm like Saturday Night Live. I'm always best during an election cycle.
Yes.
And that's scary when you have like a little tiny human at home. When I have a husband who is not interested in any of that at all, logs on to Instagram because he only has people that he knows, that he follows, like that he's met in person and could text. And so they didn't sign up for this. And so that to me was really scary. And I went through and I did like a digital cleanse to make sure that my home address was no longer, because before I didn't really care. I was like, what are they going to do? Break a window? But now it's like, what are they going to do? Break a window? Yes. And there's a little tiny human who didn't ask for that. And so it is scary. Yeah. But it's also scary for me to think of her living in a world where her dad didn't say something when he saw something wrong. That is scary for me too. I want her to be able to look back and say, yeah, you know what? Someone threw something at the window, but he said the things that made me proud.
I can tell you from my end of the tunnel, where my kids are 16 and 18, and this happened a couple years ago, so they were 16 and 14 at the time. Um, it was terrifying, and my husband's not really on social media. He literally has an Instagram account so he can like follow me and one of our kids who's on it, and that's about it. And he's not interested in like the whole political theater of all of it like I am. Like you and I are cut from the same cloth, and our husbands are cut from the same cloth in that respect, and they didn't sign up for it. And they're very private. And at one point I remember looking at my older son when this whole thing happened, and I was like, look, I'm sorry this is really stressful for you. And he was like, That's all right, mom. Like you did what's right. Like you're you're standing up for the things that matter." And my younger son, who is gay, in the beginning, people started writing things about me, but then they would go into my social media and they'd find pictures of him and say
Huh.
things like, "Look at this, she's such a terrible mother, she's turning her sons into lady boys," and stuff like that. That I didn't respond to any of the comments. I worked very hard to not respond to any of the comments, but there was one moment where I was almost like, "Joke's on you, motherfucker. I'm already halfway there." I didn't. I didn't. But that's the moment where I really sort of seriously considered shutting everything down, because I was like, once they dragged my kids into it, like that's serious, right? Like there's a whole thing in presidential politics, like you don't make fun of the kids, like you leave the kids alone. But that's the thing. Like if you are a CEO, if you are a leader, if you're somebody who's watching this and you're thinking about like, how do I bring my whole self to work in a way that I can um, allow my employees to also bring their whole selves to work? How do you do that in a way where you're also protecting those around you who didn't ask for it?
Well, this is really interesting. Speaking of segues, this happens so often in storytelling when somebody says like, "Oh, I want to tell this story of the thing that happened to me, but I don't want to hurt the other person in the story." It's like,
Yes, my
th-
my best story is a story I go out on stage and we jokingly call it the "my kids are assholes" story, right? Like my kids hate that I tell that story, and I'm like, well, you shouldn't have been assholes that day, right?
yeah, yeah. And the challenge so often is telling it from uh, putting perspective in other people's voice. I've been really thoughtful about that, even with social media, with my daughter.
Hmm.
Of I don't post in her voice, so
Yes,
you don't see posts that are like um she says I love you. I don't know what she says. She
right.
may say screw you. I don't know what she says. She doesn't send kisses because she gets to choose if she sends kisses.
Hmm.
So like I was very clear that and I've had people reach out and say like, are you sure you want to post her pictures or things like that? And I've been very clear that like I'm not posting from her perspective. We don't have an Instagram account that's her talking.
Hmm.
She has an Instagram account that has nothing in it, so that I could just give it to her someday if Instagram still exists when she's old enough to have it. But I don't post on her behalf. I don't post in her voice, because I think as a leader in what you were talking about in the business world and as a communicator in the world, the stories that we choose to share, they allow people in if we want them to come in, and we don't have to share them in a way that is self-disclosing that discloses of others. So in the case of the story that you're mentioning with your sons, you don't talk about what they were thinking and feeling, and you tell it from your perspective. You don't assign them attributes beyond what you saw and witnessed, and it's ultimately about what you felt, which is I think what we need more people to do. Honestly, more people on stage, there's this idea in the world of communicating, leaders at conferences and inside of organizations, when I work with them for their company year end things and I'm helping them with speeches, is we want to get to know you. We want some self uh, we want you to reveal yourself in a way. And the challenge in that always is that people go to, oh, I need to find like a very vulnerable story, a vulnerability story. And it's like, that's not what we want either, because that feels dirty and wrong because you're doing it to manipulate me. Versus, can you just talk about what happened from your perspective? Like if you're going to talk about, Lucille Ball being an icon because of being the first pregnant woman on TV, then tell it from what that meant to you, not a historical. I think
Yes.
so many people, when they get on stage, executives, leaders, when they get in front of their employees just at a team meeting, we play the role of researcher, of reporter. And what I think people want more is more revelation. How do you feel? How do you think about it? What did it mean to you? Because in that, I can start to understand how I feel. And I think that the leaders who do that are the ones who actually get followers. People get behind them and say, I like how this person thinks. I like what they feel. I felt those same things. And it's so nice to hear that they did as well. You know, and this year, 2020, has given so many opportunities for people to do that if they wanted to come out and be real and be honest and say, here's what I'm thinking and here's what I'm worried about. And I think what a shame if we didn't take it, because then we made it a place where our teams, our employees, our followers on social couldn't do that for themselves either, because they didn't see us doing it.
Yeah, there's so many. Every time somebody gets on stage and they start off with the like Winston Churchill once said, and you're just like, oh God, this is gonna be terrible, right? Like they start with a quote, then they give their like 3-point plan in the middle, and then they end with a quote, and it's like, oh my God, it's like your high school like elliptical essay, 11 sentences. I mean, it's just terrible, and you don't see them in there, right? You don't
Right.
see them. They literally have the green screen up, on their online presence, and they figuratively have it up when they're standing in front of you, and you just don't get to see people at all. And the end of the my kids are asshole story, as because you helped me craft it and make it better, is that it starts off with like how they were terrible, how I felt badly, and then they end up being the heroes of the story at the end of the day, and the lessons that we all came together and learned. And when I first told the story on stage, it was all about me, and then the story became all about us and all about how what I learned from them. And people come up to me after I tell that story on stage, and they tell me that that was one of the most moving things they've ever heard. And every time I tell the story, and I've now done this like, I don't know, 50 times on stage, my voice still breaks at the moment where I'm like, and I second guessed every decision I ever made as a mom, and every sacrifice I ever chose not to make as a working mom. And every time I get emotional about it, because it brings us right back in to that moment, and I think about some of these speakers who talk about moments of trauma, and that as they tell the story, they have to re-experience that trauma every single time. And yet, for some of them, that's the thing that's going to move their audience to do whatever it is that they need to do to change the world, change the business, change the family, change whatever. The re-experiencing is a really interesting psychological experience.
And in some ways, the re-experiencing it from a different angle is a different experience in itself. So being able to look back and say, this thing happened and I went through it, and my emotional response to it now in front of you is not my emotional response to it happening to me.
Mm.
And I think that for me, when I work with people who are telling a story like that, and there are those places, if the emotional response is because of what happened to you, then maybe you're not quite ready to share it broadly. Maybe you're ready to share it with some people who are going to comfort you in their safety and there's love in the room, but you're not ready to share it when someone in the audience is going to tweet and be like, this sucked. You're not ready for that yet. But if you're telling the story and you're getting emotional because the circumstances are emotional, because there's true emotion in it, but it's not about what happened to you, then I think that those are stories that are ready to be told. And it's a fine line, but there is definitely a line there between I'm emotional because I'm processing what happened to me versus I'm emotional because it's a human experience that I'm witnessing again. And I would be emotional if it was your human experience in the same way.
Oh, that's such a good distinction, especially when you're on stage, and it is such a vulnerable place to be in the first place, right? When you're
Yeah.
telling your story, when you're writing, it's now that we're all speaking online and we're on screens, you see the chat next to you the entire time, and normally you don't see what people are thinking, right? But now they're like actually putting it into the chat, and it's like getting a real life focus group all the time. And I haven't had the experience yet where people have been like, "This lady's terrible," but I've had moments where like the chat's blowing up and it's really great, and yeah, amazing, amen, preach. And then there's moments where it's just like quiet for a couple minutes, and I'm like, oh no.
Yeah.
And then that original voice comes back, like, what am I doing wrong? It's quite terrifying. So let's talk about how do we find our stories? How do we figure out what the stories are that should be told and what the stories are that maybe either we're not ready to tell or that we think are super important, but we shouldn't be telling them?
I think the easy part of that is the stories that are not ready to be told are the ones where you don't know the insight yet. You don't know the lesson yet. If it's a story you're telling just to go through what you went through, it's not ready yet. Because even if you think of the people who are I've worked with astronauts and I've worked with Mount Everest people. I've worked with both of those speakers before. And the the interesting thing for both of them is we have to give them some real moments for people. Otherwise, it's totally unrelatable. It's
Right.
totally unrelatable to be like, I'm not going to go to the moon anytime soon. So your story is unrelatable unless we can find some like we need to find the insight. We need to find the like, what does this mean? What's the takeaway here? And it doesn't have to be like so here's the lesson for you, but we need there to be some kind of insight. So it's definitely not a story that's ready to tell if you don't know what the lesson was yet. It means you're still inside of it. You haven't figured that out yet. So that's the easy one to answer. Once you have the lessons, then I think it's, up to you whether you tell them or not. But if you know what the lesson is, then it's ready to be told if you're ready to share it. I think one of the things that happens so often with people with telling their story is they think it's a conception to this moment right now story they need to find. They need to find the like, what is the thing that started when, what is that called? The embryo pop or whatever happens? I forget, the blastocyst or something. I learned this when, you go through IVF as two gay men. Surprise, we
Right.
didn't
I mean, again,
naturally
I
do
went
this.
to high school in Miami. Like, I didn't go through IVF.
Yeah.
Like,
So,
this is
so
bad
from the
education
moment
a really
of
long time ago.
from the moment of blastocyst to the moment of you standing in front of him, people think I need to find that story. But
Mm.
if you think about the stories we read, if you think about, think about your favorite authors. Think of David Sedaris. I mean, this person is pumping out books all the time because what is he doing? He's honing in on scenes. So when you're looking for stories to share from your life, what we have to do is focus on scenes, not on chapters. We don't need to focus on what happened at birth to now and what's the story of you, because there isn't one. There's whatever, we could all make up a story of us a million different ways and tell it however we'd like. What's more interesting to an audience, what's more helpful to your employees, what's intriguing to read are the scenes that you're in and what you made those mean. And so when we're starting to look for stories for speakers specifically, one of the things I think about is, okay, so the thing that you're sharing, the insight, the tip you want to share, the change you want to make, you weren't born knowing that. So let's find 10 different times you learned that, because if you're here ready to teach it, you probably learned it 10 different times. So let's go through and just find all of them that we can. Did it happen when you were a kid? Did it happen with your mom? Did it happen in an office? Did it happen at a Starbucks? Where are all of the times? And then let's hone in, let's zoom in on those scenes and see which of those is worthy to tell to this audience. And so for teaching the same lesson you've learned in life, we can probably find 10 or 15 different ways to approach it. The most interesting one is going to be the one that's relatable, that or that is totally unrelatable, and people are like, what? I can't believe that happened to you. And so we look for those, but we look for scenes, not chapters, and not full life narratives. I mean, most movies, some TV shows, even some series take place over a couple of days. I'm watching The Undoing right now on HBO, which is, I think, is a show that's like when you have writers and cast at the height of their greatness, you get a show like The Undoing. I'm loving it. Have you watched it?
No,
Oh, it's good.
I'll have to
But
check it out.
it's all taking place. It's like we're 5, 6 episodes in, and it's been like 2 days because they're focusing in on scenes. Because what's boring to an audience, what's boring to your employees is like, yeah, so, some things were happening and I realized we had to do better. And so we did better. And this is what that looks like. What I want to know is like, what was the scene? What was the moment? What did she say to you when you realized you needed to do it better?
Yes.
That's where those stories are. And I think that's where most people can tell better stories. I mean, even in the story that you're referencing about your sons, it's focused in on the scene, not in like the sweeping life you've had with your sons and everything they've taught you. It's one specific scene and what the takeaway was. And that is always really interesting and really relatable and really, I think, usable for an audience when they hear it.
Yeah, I mean, for those that are like, "What the hell's the story already?" It's the story is about it's the first day of school, and I thought, I was gonna get the photo, the first day of school photo to prove to my, world, everyone on social media that I was the world's best mom, and of course my kids didn't let me do that because they wouldn't stop bickering long enough for that to happen. So it's all about the first day of school, and it's, the lesson is to be taught that like it wasn't about what everybody else wanted and how I proved to everyone else that I'm great. It was actually about having that good relationship with my kids and how the whole thing unfolds over the course of like 4 minutes at the start of the talk and then 3 minutes about a quarter of the way in to resolve the story and then a call back at the very end. But as you're talking, I'm I'm realizing the reason that that talk is so that the story is so effective, and we could probably do a whole podcast just on breaking down this one story and or any one story that you've helped train people with, is that it is relatable. It's one scene that a lot of the people in my audience have experienced either as a parent or as a kid, right? Like you've experienced that moment of that high stakes thing in a relationship that you've had, and it's sort of it is just this sort of microcosm story. And I never realized until now that the reason it's effective is not because it's a big story, because it's a small story. It's the smallness of it is what makes it digestible to people in the audience.
Yeah. And that's the same even for the astronauts, even for the Mount Everest people of the I trained and I went up Mount Everest and it was really hard. That's not interesting. What's interesting is the day where you were sitting there and you ran out of food and you were thinking about eating your buddy's arm and you had to question yourself and the inner monologue you went through, because that I can learn from, even though I may not be in a summit in Everest hungry. I can say, you know what? I remember looking around and not seeing the resources and being scared there wasn't enough for me. I can relate to that. I can't relate to the big story. I can relate to the small story and make it my own. I can listen to your story with your sons and say, you know what? I haven't had that yet because I haven't had the most ridicule my 8-week-old daughter gives me is kind of a dirty look sometimes if I don't get to the bottle quick enough. But I haven't had that yet. Those lessons for my child. But what I can listen to you in saying that is saying, wait a second, where has something like that happened to me with employees, with team, with something else? And so the small stories are actually what allow us to map them onto our own lives. And that is the you think about great, the great leaders we've heard from. They tell these small stories when they write their books, the business memoirs. It's about the little things that happened and how they learned lessons, not the big sweeping generalities of their life. It's those small things, because we can somehow mimic that even if our circumstances are slightly different.
I think the other thing that the stories, telling our stories does is it immediately makes us comfortable on stage. Right? Like if I'm going to walk out on stage and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to quote Winston Churchill, I'm thinking the entire time, oh my God, what if I get this wrong? What if I get the words wrong? And then where do I go and how do I segue? And oh my God. But if I walk on stage and the first thing I do is I tell a story that I know because I lived it, then suddenly I'm comfortable. Like I really think that my fear of public speaking in the beginning, I think a lot of people's fear of public speaking is that we're sort of out of our depth, right? We're like
Mhm.
trying to present this big fancy formal thing when really we should be communicating as opposed to speaking, right? It's a very different skill set.
Yeah, and it's about, I think that the people that are going to have the long career, that are going to have the followers and the stick with itness over time, and regardless of how the platforms shift, and I think they're going to keep shifting. It's not just now; it's going to keep shifting. Are the people who can look at what's going on and find relatable ways to explain their experiences. And you don't that's somebody asked me about coming on shows like this and doing podcasts and things like that, of like, oh, do you want to know all the questions? Do you want to? No, I don't want to know anything, because at the end of the day, I'm not here to tell you what Aristotle said about public speaking. I'm here to share my little experiences about being the class president, about being the kid who lived in the trailer with the teen mom who told him he could be anything and he believed her. That's what I'm here to tell you about. And for whatever reason, I've either hoodwinked the world, because I've had bankers and financial institutions and all kinds of serious buttoned up people pay me to hear those stories to help them tell theirs, or there's something to the fact that what we want from the people we want to follow and learn from is something a little more real that we can copy, that we can learn from, and we can mimic. And if all we hear are the great, grandiose, big stories of heroes, I don't see myself in that, and it's really hard to say I can do that too. It's why every superhero has a underdog story, because otherwise they're not relatable. It's why Kelly Clarkson has to be so damn likable, because she's so impressive otherwise. We need people to be both. I think Celine Dion works as a icon because she's quirky and odd in person. I think that Dolly Parton works as an icon because she is says her little Dollyisms. We need, if you're going to be impressive, we also need you to be relatable. And I think that these little stories from our lives help us do that.
That's incredible. But I thought you were going to go somewhere totally else with that statement, actually. But I do think you're right. And I think especially women leaders, Black leaders, leaders of color, LGBTQ, the less traditional you are, the more there is a bit of an expectation that you've got to show some humanity, because you're threatening in so many ways that people are like, I don't know what to do. Um, and I find that a lot in my executive coaching. But where I thought you were going with that is that it works uh, because deep down, you said deep down, people, want to hear these stories from people. But I thought you were going to say deep down, it works because what people really want is just to be heard and to be seen and to actually tell their stories. And we feel like we can't. We're so trapped inside of the
Yeah.
expectations of everyone else. So that's where I thought you were going with it. So I'm actually curious, is that true? Do people actually want to be heard, or are most people just, they'd rather not be? I mean, in your experience working with all of these authors and speakers and astronauts and bankers, do they just want to like get the job done and like get out as soon as possible? Or when you start opening them up and they're telling their stories, do you see like almost relief come over them?
I think I think that if by heard we mean they want their experiences validated, then yes.
Mm,
I think there are a lot of people who don't resonate with being heard because they think, you know what, I'm okay. Like, I'm okay not being heard. But I think what we all want is for our experiences to be validated, for someone to say, wow, you did go through that. And what did you make of it? And what's beautiful about that, if you go back to what you said a couple of minutes ago, no one can refute that. No one can tell me that my experience as a school class president, what I felt it meant, what I took away from it, no one can tell me that's wrong. And so there's something validating about that, of sharing the story. And the same thing with you, of walking off stage and a parent saying, oh my gosh, thank you for saying that. I've been in that exact place. That's so meaningful to me. In a way, we as an audience resonate when the speaker does that, because it validates our experiences as well. And if all we tell are the big stories, then it's hard for the audience to see themselves in us, and we don't validate their experience. I think it's why and you and I, have a text thing about all the like relatable, normal people that are celebrities that we love. And so it's like, I think that's why Rachel Ray works. I think that's why Dolly Parton works. I think that's why Reba McEntire tries really, really hard to position herself as kind of like a fun, quirky person, because I think that when we see them like that, we can say, that's a little bit like me. And when you validate someone's experience, they will follow you. They will buy your books. They will buy your albums. They will put you on their stages. Even if they themselves don't feel the need to be heard, everybody wants their experiences validated. And we as leaders in companies, we as leaders on stages, on podcasts, on books, on platforms, we have the ability to validate people's experiences by telling our small stories. I think that's true.
I think it is true, and I almost feel like a responsibility to it, right? Like I could get on stage and I could tell. There's lots of stories I could tell that would be, the best offense is a good defense, right? They would appear to be vulnerable stories, but in reality, I'm only showing you part of myself. Or I could get on stage and I can actually show you the this thing that I'm not very proud of. I could tell the story about the day that I realized I was the world's worst manager and I was completely abusive to my staff. Or I could get on stage and I can like tell you a story about like a leader who I saw that was like that. I witnessed it, I was part of it, but it wasn't me, right? And I think that we can make these decisions about how much we let people in. And I read an article a while ago about how we shouldn't demand that gay people come out. We should wait for them to invite us in, right? And I feel like in a way it's sort of, we make that decision every day as humans. Like, do we
Yeah.
do we invite people in, or do we have them, do we let them drag us out, and we decide how much of that we want to have? And right, some of us get the privilege to do that in some ways, and not others. But I think there's that question of sort of, how do you decide how much of yourself you put out there, and sort of at what stage in your life you do it? And I think storytelling is such a smart way to think about that. Like, how do you tell your personal stories, and which stories you're ready and you're able to tell? So I love that is the work that you do, that helping people figure those stories out.
And what's fun and rewarding in it is that I've not run into anyone where we don't have them, because we all got here to wherever we are right now through a bunch of stuff we've been through that we turned into meaning. And so when people say like, I don't have any stories, it's like, sure, maybe you weren't like you didn't climb Everest or write a best-selling book or something, but you've been through some stuff that taught you what you know today. So let's go find those things,
Yes.
because I think that's what people want to hear from you.
How do you
Really.
farm those out of people? How do you get them going?
It's it's little things. It's sometimes doing an inventory of like, what do you believe? What do you believe? If someone's coming to me and they're going to give a speech, they're going to give a a wedding speech, an onstage speech, a corporate speech, or they're getting ready to do interviews. If that's the case, then it's a little bit easier because we can say, okay, well, what do you want to say to these people? What do you want them to think? And then I say, that's interesting. Why do you think that? Well, I
Mm.
believe this is true. Okay, well, when was it not true? Was there ever a time where it wasn't true for you? Was there ever a time where were screaming at the wall about it? Like, let's go through and figure out when you learned this, because you weren't born knowing this. You've been through things that taught you this. Let's go find some of those examples to see if one of them might not be a cool way to put a light on it for the audience. And almost always we can find it that way.
I love that. I love that. I could talk to you all day, but we do we do these interviews for an hour. You didn't bring your daughter. I wanted to interview her, but fine. We'll just have to do another one.
I'm sure at some point she will have a lot to say.
I'm going to interview her about all the ways her father Mike screwed her up.
Yep.
That's going to be it.
Start the journal
That's
now.
perfect, but you, we'll see. We'll see. But I would be remiss if I didn't say congratulations. It is absolutely wonderful. I love your family. It's fantastic, and I loved your drag baby shower, which was the most fun thing
Oh,
ever.
we knew with the baby shower, it was like, we're going to be having a baby shower that has to be online. And in a normal baby shower, people can go off and talk to each other. Three little friends can go here and there and everywhere. In a virtual thing, everyone's just staring at the screen. So I was like, we got to do something. And so that was super fun. Who doesn't love drag queens and sangria?
I mean, I love drag queens and sangria, and so here's our sample set of two. That feels like a pretty complete set to me. So I'm okay. But I think that that's part of it, right? Like that's the story. That's the story that you're telling of your fatherhood, is how are you doing that? How do you include people? How do you bring your community together in support of your daughter? And I just think it's a wonderful thing. So people who are listening, I'm sure, are like, this is incredible. I need to tell my stories. I need to figure out how to do it in writing and speaking, whatever. How do people find you? How do they
What?
say, bring me Mike Ganino? How do they
Bring
bring
me Mike Ganino. You could go to the internet and you could summon me that way. If you Google Mike Ganino, once you spell Ganino, Ganino, I am probably the one that's going to pop up. So MikeGanino.com and Mike Ganino on all the socials. And then if you specifically want help with your storytelling or kind of finding like, what are some of the stories I need to be telling or I should be thinking about, I got a free guide at MikeGanino.com/storycraft. So you go get that and it guides you through like prompts, actually kind of the prompts that I was just explaining a couple minutes ago. It guides you through those so you can kind of mine your own experiences to see what you come up with. But yeah, I'm in all the easy places. And you could go listen to my interview with Laura on the mic drop moment. She was my very first guest and made me feel really confident about going out there and having a podcast because it was just such a good chat.
It was me, you, and the clucking chicken.
That's a party.
Yep, there you go. Thank you so much. I adore you. I appreciate you. Thank you for being here and teaching my community how to tell our stories.
Thanks for having me.